Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the channel. And today, I hope you are all well. First of all, channel's grown quite a lot over the past few days, or few months, should I say? And thank you for reach 200, exceeded 200. It's great. And yeah, I hope you're all surviving this whole COVID business and all that kind of stuff. It was all still rather painful and things like that. I hope none of you have been too badly affected. Nevertheless, probably a very important topic for the time is self-love. One of the most important topics, in fact, and I'll show you why. This is a question you hear ad nauseum these days. We should love one another, we should love all the time, and basically the whole world has gone completely hippie. You constantly hear certain verses in the Bible quoted, love your neighbor as thyself. And everyone seems to be very, very concerned with a lack of love and that we should love each other more. But one thing you actually never hear about is self-love, right? You hear a lot about how great I am and how this and that. But in terms of self-love, you don't really actually get a whole heck of a lot of that. And when you do, 99.999% of it is actually narcissism. It's not love. It's not self-love. It is actually narcissism, and we will get into that. And so the guiding principle is again, we're a Christian channel, so I'm going to take you to, obviously going to take you to the Bible. And so here we have the story of someone that approaches Jesus and said, Master, which is the great commandment in the law, right? Which is the greatest of the commandments? Said to you, thou shalt love the Lord of your heart with all thy heart and all thy soul and all thy mind, right? And then this is the first and great commandment. And the second is similar. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So we understand, anyone that it gets involved in this sort of thing, we understand that this is a summary of the 10 commandments, right? The first 4 is love for God. The last 6 is love for your fellow man. But notice something very, very important. When we quote, you hear this quoted ad nauseum, absolutely ad nauseum, to death, right? But you will notice that when people when people talk about this, they always forget that the reference point of this entire thing is thyself. Love your neighbor. Well, how should I love my neighbor? As thyself. This is the focal point. This is the reference point. And people always forget this. When you hear the preaching and all that kind of stuff, when people quote this verse, they're always talking, the argument, immediately what's about to proceed is a sermon or a soliloquy or a monologue about how you should love your neighbor, right? And more often than not, when someone is quoting this verse, right, usually they're saying, well, I need you to love me. Right? Whenever this verse is quoted, it's like either you need to love X and Y and Z, or you need to love me, right? And the fact that this is referring to self-love is completely ignored for the most part. You never hear people talk about it. Never mentioned. Why? This is the reference point. It's the point of reference. Love thyself. And hopefully by the end of this message, I will hope to have convinced you people that this is one of the greatest problems in the world today, is the fact that we ignore this. We ignore this part here. And then we're going to talk to, so we see here, we tie this into the commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous, right? And interestingly enough, let me refer you, so we'll get back to it later. When you look at the Beatitudes, it says something very interesting here. It said, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they that mourn. Now, this all looks very, very strange. But we're gonna, why would you be blessed if you're mourning, all right? So they say that those who mourn are blessed, but why, and what does this have to do with self-love, and why would you be mourning? Blessed are the meek and so on and so forth. This actually ties into the Beatitudes a lot, especially if you know that the Beatitudes constitute the Christian walk, right? Constitute the Christian walk. But let's start at the beginning. Right, at the beginning. First of all, what is self-love? Right. Self-love is actually quite a simple thing. Fairly straightforward thing. Self-love is simply to regard yourself as you are. You regard yourself to regard oneself as they are. So what you see in the world is usually one of two things. To regard yourself as you are. So when you pathologize this, you get one of two things. You either get it the way, in the grandiose way that a narcissist does it. And how the narcissist regards himself is obviously in a grandiose way. So basically, the grandiose way is he sees only his good qualities to the exclusion utterly of all his bad qualities. There are, in fact, as far as the narcissist is concerned, there are no bad qualities. So he will see himself only in the grandiose fashion, that is, he will recognize all of his good parts, his strengths, to the exclusion of the negative ones. And not only that, but he will go further to add strengths that he does not have, to see in himself good qualities that do not exist in himself, good qualities that he does not have. Okay? So this picture is not only lopsided, right, unbalanced, but it is a fantasy. It's an illusion, because you are not actually loving yourself, because you are, first of all, you're excluding. Part of who you are is excluded, right? So part of loving yourself means loving all of yourself, not just some of yourself, right? Part of yourself is utterly excluded, and another part of yourself is simply untrue. It's not real. Strengths that you, so only a very, very small portion of this regard for oneself is actually based on fact. The majority of it is a lie. Okay, so you are not in fact loving yourself. You love a piece of fiction, something that doesn't actually exist, right? And then on the other hand, you get people who regard themselves, and this is then in a negative way. Then it's then the complete opposite, where they only see the negatives of themselves. I'm disgusting. I'm untrustworthy. I'm a coward. I'm useless. I'm stupid. I'm whatever the case might be. They only see the negatives of themselves to the exclusion of all of the positives. The total exclusion to all of the positives. And not only that, but they will even add to the negatives things which are not true. So it's the complete opposite, right? The complete opposite. And if you look at the psychological literature and stuff like that, you will actually find that this is also a form of narcissism. So narcissism and borderline personality disorder have their sort of their overt and their covert states. So you have the grandiose narcissist and you have the shy narcissist. The grandiose narcissist is the he thinks better of himself the grandiose way, and then the shy narcissist is one who sort of has no confidence and only sees himself as a bad object, but who secretly views himself as grandiose, but is unable to sustain that. And then with borderline as well, you generally find, if you speak to a borderline, and one of the main things is women tend to fall in this category more often than not, is in borderline, is that self-depreciation. It's I don't trust myself. I'm useless. I'm disgusting. I'm whatever the case might be. And then there's that constant need to seek approval and stuff like that of people around them, and so on and so forth. And then a hypersensitivity to criticism, all of these kinds of things, and subduing themselves under other people and all that kind of stuff. And then you see similar features in the narcissist as well. So these are pathological ways of viewing yourself, utterly pathological, and they are in fact not self-love at all. And 99% of what you get out there in the world, all of the self-help stuff, all of these life coaches, all of these gurus, they're not actually teaching you self-love at all. They're teaching you narcissism. You are powerful. You are this, you're that. You get anything you want, you can put your mind to. That, if that's not magical thinking, I don't know what is. Because the idea that anything you put your mind to, you can achieve, is simply counterfactual. It's garbage, because you are not omnipotent. Okay? You are not omnipotent. End of story. So the vast majority, in fact, the organizing principle in the world today, especially in the West, is narcissism. It's not self-love, it is narcissism. Pure, unadulterated narcissism, right? And then with narcissism comes this constant sense of entitlement. My right to this and my right to that and my right to the next thing. And no one is ever allowed, no one is ever permitted to show you who you really are. So, to the exclusion of all the things that you can never say anything negative about anyone or anything or whatever the case might be, and we need to be protected from all negativity, right? And that's the narcissistic way of being, is this grandiose view of oneself to the exclusion of everything that is negative. You are not allowed to tell the narcissist that he's actually not as wonderful as he thinks he is, and if you do, off with your head, okay? So this is the imbalance of love, of self-love that we see in the world, okay? The total imbalance, it's either one or the other. True self-love means that you regard yourself in a way that is factual, that is true, who you are really, both good and bad. And so you can test these things in a sense. So it's like, do I have self-love, right? So do you have a realistic, is your view of yourself, is it realistic, right? Is it factual? Is it realistic? There's something that in psychology is called reality testing, right? Reality testing. And people with mental disorders and stuff like that, or emotional disorders or personality disorders, whatever the case might be, one of the things that is a feature of these disorders is that people are unable to test reality. What is really there? What's really going on, both internally and externally? Verbalize what's really going on or see what's going on. Then there's that lack of insight. I can't really see who I really am. And so there's an inordinate reliance on other people to tell them who they are, right? They are, and this is, again, you see this pathology in the world where everyone is gathering into groups that then fight against each other, and you see that the individuals that constitute these groups, they're not actually individuals. You know what I'm saying? They don't really, if you actually ask them who they are, they don't really know who they are. They're just following the group. They get their identity externally from the group, right? And you see this all over the place, especially with a lot of the leftism that occurs today with all of the social justice and stuff like that. But you get it on the right as well. So all of the nationalism and stuff like that is exactly the same thing. And it's all psychotic, because most of the stuff that they perceive as a part of their identity does not actually exist. All right, does not actually exist. So things like the nation state is a piece of fiction, right? The nation state is a piece of fiction. The whole race thing, it's a piece of fiction, right? Especially if you've got a biblical perspective where we all descend from Adam and Eve, and all we are variations on the same. Then the whole concept of race it's a piece of fiction. It doesn't exist. Culture is a piece of fiction. It doesn't actually exist. It's simply a compilation of a whole bunch of arbitrary things that tend to originate from a specific place. And there might be reasons and stuff, but essentially, again, it's a piece of fiction. I'm part of this group or part of that group. I'm a goth, or I'm a this, or whatever the case might be. It's all fiction. It's psychotic. We make up this thing in our minds as if it is, and then we project it outward, and we pretend that this thing is real, right? Whether you are a Republican or whether you are a Democrat. It's a fiction. It's the definition of psychosis, where you take something that is an internal object in your imagination, a fictitious construct, and you project it outwards, and you pretend like it actually exists, like it's actually something real, right? And we know these things are not real because they're transient. Once upon a time they didn't exist, now they exist, and then tomorrow who knows? They could change. They're not even like liquid, because liquid is always liquid. They're nothing. They change all the time. These are not consistent things, and therefore when people try to derive a sense of identity from these things, you are basically building your house on sand, on something that is not real, and which is why no matter what you do, you are left feeling empty, and you are left questioning who you really are, because these things are not, they're false. It's complete nonsense. It's what's known as a peripheral identity, but we're going to get to that. And then you can ask a question: are you pursuing your own happiness? And believe it or not, the vast majority of people do not actually do that, right? They self-sabotage. They all the time, right? They self-sabotage. They self-depreciate. They will work on something, or they'll do something, and then they'll just demolish it, or they won't finish it, or they will actively self-trash. For example, go out on a binge drinking trip, or go out and get into some dangerous situation, or whatever the case might be, drugs, or fight with their families, and all these kinds of things. And you often get people who do that in like relationships, right? You get in a relationship, and if that relationship starts going really, really well, the person will then do something to sabotage the relationship. And you'll be like, well, what are you doing? I thought everything was going great. And then, oh, you're smothering me, or whatever the case might be, and they sabotage the relationship. Immediately, you're dealing with someone there's no love there. Okay, self-sabotaging. They don't behave in ways that generate good results, good consequences, good ends, and stuff like that, right? It's a constant self-sabotage sort of thing. There's no love, right? And it really, really boils down to a lack of self-love. There is no self, and they might not even realize it. They might think, yeah, I love myself, whatever the case might be. Again, because they might be imbibing a lie. But in reality, it's like, no, you don't love yourself at all. So you will see people are very self-destructive. They're very self-defeating. They're self-sabotaging. A terrible, terrible thing, right? So how do we get self-love, right? How do we get self-love? There's a process, right? There's a process. By the way, for those of you who are interested, this material I'm getting from the psychological literature, and those individuals who are inspiring and all these kinds of stuff, you can go look at individuals like Professor Sam Vaknin, and there are several others and stuff like that, which I watch, which I listen to, and I'm actually borrowing. Okay, so I'm not a genius that I come up with these things by myself. It's the stuff that I'm getting from outside, from the literature, from professors, people who discuss these things, right? So we need at least four conditions of self-love, right? And you have to satisfy all them all. When it comes to love, it's an all or nothing thing. You got to get it all in, or not, right? So let's first explain something very, very quickly, right? What happens? If you watch my other video on the video on love and being loved, right? We recognize there that if that a person, you can't love someone who doesn't allow you to love them, right? It's a problem there, right? You've got to let people in, and if you don't love yourself, you won't allow actually anyone else to love you either, right? So if you don't have self-love, right, you essentially condemn yourself to a loveless existence. Is essentially what you do, right? I don't love myself, and if I don't love myself, I sure as hell I'm not going to allow anyone else to love me either, right? I'm going to sabotage. I'm going to do all of these kinds of things. And so a person on the outside who recognizes, right, when you sort of think, well, why should we bother with self-love, right? When you see someone, you advertise. If you don't love yourself, you advertise this fact in the way you talk, in the way you behave, and all these other things. And people are going to see that, right? And it's a very similar thing. So like when you see someone who's a very attractive, someone who looks after themselves, they bathe, just and they present themselves in they're well dressed, they're well groomed. They're presenting saying, listen, I'm healthy. I'm and if I'm like this with myself, I'm practiced at looking after at least this. You understand what I'm saying? And so so they're sort of telling you, look, I'm capable of looking after you, because the evidence of this is the fact that I look after myself. Yeah. And so a person who neglects themselves, they don't bathe, they don't this, they don't do that, whatever the case might be. We are advertising it's almost like a skills or things that we do or do not do. And if you don't have self-love, you do advertise this fact. Again, like I said, with the self-sabotage and all of these kinds of things. And when you look at someone who's like, they don't love themselves, right? Why am I going to get in a relationship with someone who doesn't love themselves? Because this tells me something, that if a person doesn't love themselves, it means they actually have no, they actually have no experience in the act of love. Because here's what a lot of people don't realize, especially if we look at the developmental psychology. We realize that we learn to love and practice the art of loving first through self-love. That's how we learn, and practice it, until such time as then we learn someone else, love someone else. And once we've practiced that by loving ourselves, we can then do it for someone else. And this is why, if you don't have self-love, you won't be able to love another person, right? You're going to treat them badly. You might like them. You might hold them in high regard. You understand what I'm saying? Nevertheless, you'll find that when you get in a relationship with someone who you really like, because you are unable to actually love them properly, you will recognize, you know what, I'm actually not good for this person. Sort of thing. And then you might sabotage the relationship. And there's and you think, I'm not a good person, I am this, I'm that, and then you sort of start to deprecate yourself, right? And all these kinds of things. This is what will sort of happen. Okay. So the process of learning how to love, right? Again, we must go to developmental psychology. When you are an infant, a baby, right? You don't have object relations, right? As in, is you, the object that is you. You don't have this concept, right? Doesn't exist. And the concept that is mom, outside of me, doesn't exist. As far as you are concerned, me and mom are the same thing. There is no space between us. We are identical, right? Therefore, love for mother is also love for myself at the same time. And this is why it is so important for a mother to love herself, because if she loves herself properly, and when the infant is born, the infant recognizes no difference between her and the mother. The infant learns to love themselves through the mother's love. So if the mother does not love herself, if the mother is a narcissistic individual, if the mother is a neglectful individual, if the mother is an absent individual, and all of that kind of stuff, the child will never learn to self-love. And literally, this is how young it's starting before you can even speak. This education, this training in how to love starts before you even learn how to speak. Right? You learn to love yourself through the self-love of the mother. And if a mother loves herself, she'll be able to love you. If she does not love herself, she will not be able to love you as the child. And if she's unable to love you as a child will have no experience in what it is like not only to love yourself, but to love others, and you'll never learn to love. And you'll grow up with all kinds of problems. Which is precisely why the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and why narcissism is becoming an organizing principle in the world. Why? Because where are mothers these days? They are not at home looking after their children. They, as soon as humanly possible, mothers abandon their children and they go to work, or they go do something else, because children are bothersome. Children are an obstacle to the mother's grandiose visions of a life of corporate success, right? And the child feels abandoned very, very easily. I think the studies were that if a mother is absent for more than about 20 hours a week, I believe it was, it might be less, that if the mother is absent from the child's life for more than about 20 hours, because the mother is a primary object, the child will immediately exhibit signs of abandonment anxiety, and start to develop sort of personality and mental pathologies that are associated with someone who develops. So, for example, if you look at narcissism, a feature of narcissism is abandonment anxiety. They don't want to be abandoned. A feature of borderline personality disorder is also abandonment anxiety. They're always afraid of being abandoned by the ones that they love or the ones who love them. It's this constant fear of being abandoned, of being rejected, of being left to die. So if we see a rampant narcissism and mental illness and personality disorders in the world, guess what that means? It's literally a sign that people en masse are being abandoned in their infancy as children. They're being abandoned. Mother is abandoning them. Father is abandoning them. That's literally what it means. And who do we have to thank? We have many world ideologies out there to thank for this, because feminism has said, no, you can leave. First of all, it treats mothers, any woman that wants to be a mother, that wants to be there for their children. Feminism treats you like you're a moron. Feminism spits on you for that. You're an idiot. You're a moron. Feminism has become grandiose, narcissistically grandiose, in the same way that men have always been narcissistically grandiose. I'm going to go there. I'm going to be the CEO. I'm going to be the man, right? I'm going to be the man out in the world, making my money, making my cash, having the cool car, having the title, and all of that kind of stuff. And women have gone out into the world and done the same thing. Women have truly become equal to men. Not in the good way, though. In the bad way. Everything that was wrong with men, which feminism pretended to rebel against, all feminism did was imitate it. They simply copied the pathology of that was typical, because in the past, narcissism was the vast majority of narcissists, grandiose narcissists, were male. In today's world, men and women are now equal, sort of thing. And if we look at the children, if we look at the society in general, there's less, for all of the talk about love and tolerance, with every passing year, there is less love and less tolerance. Why? Because mom, not only did dad abandon the home in the first place, but now the last bastion of hope and sanity for the child, the mother has now also abandoned the home and abandoned her children, pursuing the same narcissistic gratification that men were pursuing in the first place. All right? And that's why we're getting this in the world, right? The family, there's no one cares about the family anymore. No one cares about the infant child anymore, right? And then you get these alternative families, like 2 men and 2 women and all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry. Your child needs a mother, right? And you have these. So for example, there was a friend of mine in high school. She went and decided to have a child without getting married. Right? This is narcissism. You have to be really, really narcissistic to think that you can raise a child on your own without a father. Yes, you might have to. Right? There are many women out there who are doing it not because they want to, not because they choose to, but because they have to. And you know what? Power to them. But there are many young women out there who are narcissistic and ignorant enough, grandiose enough to think that they can do it by themselves and that they're not going to screw up the child in the process. Because you cannot serve 2 masters. You cannot serve your child and your boss. One is going to demand most of your time. And you will always, with the way that women think these days, because of feminism and stuff like that, they will always choose the boss over the child. And the child will be abandoned. The child will have a nanny and be left. And then we want to cry, or why are children the way they are? So that's that abandonment. That is the progress. So the child learns to love by the mother's self-love and the mother's love towards the child. That's how the child learns. Then the child gets to about the age of 2 years old, where the differentiation between me and mother starts to happen. What we call, they begin to separate, the individuation. Then you start developing object relations. I'm an object separate from mom. Right? And you also gain object permanence. And what that means, object permanence, means I believe that even if I don't see mom, Mom is still there. The object is permanent, whether I can see mom or not. And then you find that the child stops being anxious or crying or being afraid when you walk around the corner and they can no longer see you. They don't cry because they know just the object is now permanent. Mom can go to the other room and I can carry on playing happily because I know mom is right there. Yeah. Children who and then some children, if mom has been abandoning them sort of since the beginning, that you will find that children will be very clingy for a lot longer, sort of thing. And these are the kinds of considerations that we need to have. So object relations begin to develop properly. And if the child has had up to the age of 2 a proper sense of self-love, has been taught properly and exercised properly how to love myself, then as the individuation begins to develop, she or he will understand properly, how do I love myself and how do I love mom, and these objects of love, and then the whole thing can be expressed and exercised in a healthy way, right? And then this sort of is all finalized and accomplished roughly by the age of 4. So you've got until the age of 4 to get it right. If you screw it up before then, and this is one of the sad, devastating things in life, if you screw it up by the age of 4, everything you do after the age of 4 is basically damage control. For the rest of your life is damage control. And that's the problem with a lot of us, okay? When you find that you've grown up and you do not have self-love, right? You do not have self-love. And you realize this. There is a process in psychology that's called reparentifying, which means now, unfortunately, yeah, it's not fair. It's not easy. But you now have to be for yourself the parent that you never had. Okay? Reparentify. You now need to do the training that you never received when you were an infant. And obviously it's going to be a hell of a lot harder now than it ever was before. So you have to reparentify yourself. You now have to teach yourself that unconditional love, that all of those processes you now have to do for yourself, develop that in yourself, understand yourself, all of those things that go with it. Do it for yourself before you can't get other people to do it for you. Now, it is possible that in life you can seek out. So for those, there are many people out there who will think to themselves and they think, you know what, my parents were never really there for me, but I had an uncle or I had a grandfather or I had an aunt who sort of stepped in. So those functions can happen, right? And also, if we as human beings, as friends, as family, and all this kind of stuff, extended family, whatever the case might be, if we can love each other unconditionally, right, then we can sort of parentify each other in a sense, in a way, to help understand. But because there's no one doing it anymore, we have no frame of reference. We can't learn it. Okay, that's a big problem, right? So understanding that, how that development of love, how it happens and how it gets destroyed, right? Now we're an adult. Now I'm an adult. I'm 16 years old. I'm 18 years old, I'm 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, all the way up. I don't love myself. This is a shocking, difficult, profoundly difficult realization. I do not love myself. And as a result, I am incapable of loving others. No matter how much I try, I always end up not only hurting myself and betraying myself and self-sabotaging myself. I do the same thing to other people. All right. I do the same thing to other people. So how do I get the ball rolling in the opposite direction? How do I start this? So there's a process, right? There's a process. The first one is you've got to cultivate self-awareness, right? Self-awareness. What does this mean? Self-awareness means developing an intimate knowledge of yourself, an intimate knowledge of yourself. Now, in the world today, people are so pathetic, so shallow, so moronic, that the word intimacy has become meaningless, right? Intimacy today is just another word for sex. It's not. Intimacy means you really get to know who you are in every single little minute detail. And this is what intimacy with another person is as well, is to get to know that person in every minute little detail. Whether that detail is good, whether it is bad, it doesn't matter. You get to know who they are, good and bad. You get to know yourself, who you are, good and bad. Wrinkles, warts, pimples, right? Stylish hair, cute freckles, it doesn't matter what it is. You get to know who I am. Who am I? At the core, right inside. And what this also means is that you will turn and face your shadow. The shadow is another concept in psychology, psychoanalysis. Is all the things about yourself that you don't want to know. And the shadow can be good parts of yourself as well as bad parts of. A lot of people think that the shadow is only the bad parts of yourself. It's actually not true. The shadow can be even the good parts. The parts of yourself that you prefer to not know about, that you choose to ignore, you can't acknowledge. For whatever reason, it causes some kind of psychological dissonance. You struggle to accept it about yourself. So you push it away, you suppress it, becomes part of your shadow. And then the problem is that once it's in that dark place, it generally metastasizes and becomes awful, and sort of that's what comes out when you get drunk or when you're on drugs or when you're provoked, and that comes out and then blows up and all that kind of stuff, right? So you get to know the contents of your shadow. You get to know it's this very, very intimate self-knowledge. I know who I am. You stop lying to yourself, right? And this is why this is why Jordan Peterson actually resonated with a lot of people. So stop lying. It's like you're about to say something and you get a feeling like this is not quite right. This is you feel, you're lying to yourself. You know when you're lying to yourself. You know when you're making an excuse. You know when you're full of it. Stop doing that. Right? You need that awareness. What am I doing? What am I, when I say certain things, is that really me? Do I own this? Or am I living in a fantasy? Right? Is my concept of myself, is it true or is it a complete fantasy? Is it a fabrication? Right? And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, right? We've all watched things like America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent or American Idol and all these kind of things, these competitions and stuff. We all have seen it when someone goes up on stage and does a performance that is so terrible, but so terrible that you sit in your seat and you want to dig a hole and bury yourself on that person's. You cringe on that person's behalf because the performance is so terrible. Nevertheless, when those people get a bad reaction, they're like, how dare you? They fly in a total fit of rage because they think literally that they're wonderful. And we see that, right? It's because that person lives in a complete fantasy. And the reason why they live in a fantasy is not only because they have lied to themselves, but because the people around them have been lying to them as well. This is why you should not only lie to yourself, but this is why the Bible says don't lie. Because when you lie, you distort reality. You distort not only your ability to test reality, but other people's ability to test reality. And then as a result, you develop false concepts not only of yourself, but of each other and of the world around you. And then essentially, and this is what mental illness is about, is that you live in a world that is not actually the world. That's what narcissism is essentially about. The grandiose self-image of the narcissist is a false self. It's fake. It doesn't exist. The same thing with the borderline, that idea that I'm miserable, that I'm horrible, that I'm disgusting, that I'm what. It's not true. It's false. You get the same thing with people who have certain dysphoric things, that I'm a cat, or I'm a dog, or I'm a woman when I'm actually a man, or these kinds of things. Is there something about themselves that they're rejecting? Ultimately, that's what these things boil down to. I have rejected something about myself, and it is causing me no end of grief. And then what happens is people pursue money, or they pursue surgery, or they pursue sex, or they pursue drugs or alcohol, and they will pursue these things until that very thing completely consumes them, completely overtakes them. They have no sense of identity. They're completely destroyed, and one day they end up committing suicide. Because these things are never you. They are not you. And they will never be you, and they will never tell you who you are. Right? It's this pursuit of things which don't exist, that are false, that are not true. Right? So you need this self-awareness. What am I doing? What am I saying? Do I live in a fantasy? And also, what am I doing that prevents self-knowledge from happening? Right? Let's say a person gives me a criticism and I fly off the handle, right? Then what happens? Okay, someone is trying to tell me something true, but I fly off the handle. I perform and stuff like that. What happens is people are going to start lying to me more and more often, more regularly. Why? Because I make it so impossible for people to tell me the truth that people would rather just lie to me and be done with it. So what happens? I condemn myself to live a lie for the rest of my life, to never knowing what's true and what's not true. Literally, you're setting yourself up for like a type of schizophrenia, a schizophrenic life. You never know what's real or what is not real, because everyone's lying to you, and you're lying to yourself, because you are actively preventing the truth from coming in. And that rage that you experience as a result is when those facts come in and sort of shatter the fantasy world. It is such an earth-shattering thing, because, I mean, imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you looked in the mirror and you were in a different body. I mean, it would be crazy. You'd be like, what the hell? You know, it's really soul destroying. It drives you insane. You go insane. You can drive yourself to suicide doing this kind of stuff. And a lot of people do. Right? So for example, if in the case of borderline personality disorder, 10%, 1 in 10 people with borderline personality disorder will commit suicide, and even more than that will attempt suicide, right? Just all the time. I can't tell you how many borderlines that I've known where they're just constantly attempting suicide. They never actually get there, right? Sort of thing, because like I said, the statistic is only 1 in 10 who are successful, who actually go that far. But I mean, you're talking probably the majority, probably 8 out of 10 will try suicide, at least will make some attempt at suicide at least once, and then others will attempt suicide like once every 2 months, once a month, once every 6 months, that often. And in between that, there'll be just constant self-harm all the time, sort of cutting and all these kinds of self-harm, self-sabotage, self-trashing, going out, getting drunk, getting raped and stuff like that sort of thing too, because their idea is that they are disgusting, that they are miserable, that they deserve to be mistreated. Therefore, if you treat them nicely, treating that person nicely interferes with their idea that they are not a nice person, and therefore so they are more comfortable with the idea that they're not nice than the idea that they are nice. And so their whole identity revolves around not being a nice person. And that's why sometimes they will react really, really badly if you try to treat them nicely. But the thing is, they want to be treated nicely, but they also don't want to be treated nicely. And this is where you get the approach, avoidance, repetition, compulsion. I want you around, but I don't want you around. Love me? No, leave me alone. You're smothering me, right? You get that? It's like, well, what the hell do you want? kind of thing, right? And there's a problem. There's deep problems there, right? Unconditional love is what's required. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? So you need self-awareness. That's the first thing. After self-awareness, you need self-knowledge, right? And this is chronological, right? Because if you're not self-aware, you can't develop self-knowledge. Makes sense, right? Because otherwise, if you're not self-aware, then what are you going to develop knowledge of? Makes sense, right? Self-knowledge. So you need, so that self-knowledge is you get to know who you are. You do an assessment sort of thing. Like I was saying earlier on, sorry, I'm looking every now and then to my notes. So you now develop a full access to yourself. You explore your shadow. You explore those parts of yourself that you prefer to know nothing about. Okay. And one of the things that I find very helpful with people is like doing personality tests, right? Do a personality test. So go and so the big 5 personality test, the ocean, it's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, right? You get your big 5, and then you get your subcategories. So there's about, I think, 16, depending on how in-depth you do it, right? And some of the more in-depth ones will charge you a little bit to do it, sort of thing. But you get to do those, and you get your personality profile out. Right, what am I dealing with? Get to know yourself as intimately as possible. Who am I? What am I doing? Why do I do this and that and that? And try to figure it out. It can be said that, will anyone ever truly know themselves 100%? Maybe not. But to the best and the absolute maximum that you can possibly get to know yourself, get to know yourself. Right, get to know yourself. Now here's the problem. Then we go to step 3. So you get a knowledge of yourself. You go, you seek maybe professional advice, because one of the things that a mental health professional is supposed to do is basically put a mirror up to you and say, this is who you really are, right? Which is why many mental health professionals will tell you that it's not uncommon for patients to go, you son of a, and go storming out of the thing, and and you can have a very tumultuous relationship with a patient. But the mirror is, well, this is who you are. And one of the interesting things are, depending on how bad the person's pathology has become, you can actually see that they will cover the mirrors. They will even cover the mirrors in their own home, or they will never own a mirror. They don't own mirrors, right? So it is to put a mirror up to who are you really, right? And you can do personality trait assessments. Very, very helpful, right? And so to borrow from Sam Vaknin, there's an analysis that you can do. It's called SWOT. A SWOT analysis. SWOT is, all right, you can see SWO, right? SWOT, SWOT, right? Actually, let me do it the other way around. Where's my, there it is. So you've got S, so strengths, Now I'm distracted. So strengths, weaknesses, others, and I've completely forgotten what the T stands for, and I didn't write it in my thing. Anyway, so let's go through it first. I'll remember it during the course of what I'm saying. So you're doing a SWOT analysis, right? So the first thing is your strengths. What is your again, especially for those who discount their strengths? What are your strengths? What are you good at? What are you actually good at, right? So the process of analyzing your strengths is to actually discern what strengths you actually do have, and what strengths you actually do not actually have, right? Because a lot of times we might think we're good at something or proficient at something. We're not really actually proficient in that at all, right? And then weaknesses, right? And it's a similar thing to strengths, right? What is your weaknesses that you actually do have, right? Especially if you are the grandiose narcissistic type. What weaknesses do you actually? Because there's if the grandiose type, I have no weaknesses at all, none whatsoever, right? I'm wonderful. I'm basically God, sort of thing. What weaknesses do you actually have? And then for the others on the other side that overemphasize and even invent weaknesses, it's like what yes, these things here are weaknesses, but those things over there, those are not actually weaknesses. You're right. You've invented weaknesses, right? Then others, right? Others is the people around you. Who are these people really? What do they really mean to me? What am I really? What's my relationship with these people necessarily? Am I using them? Are they using me? Do they really have my best interests in mind? Do I and you'll find this, so a lot of people who are like recovering from substance abuses and stuff like that, their assessment of others generally means that, because when you get into certain pathologies, there's that thing that birds of a feather flock together, right? So my relationship with this person, is it based on a true loving relationship, or have we basically are we basically feeding off each other in a pathological way, right? Are we actually two leeches leeching off each other? And a lot of situations are like that. You also get something called merger and fusion, where a person subsumes themselves under someone else, rather than having their own identity, because they feel they're weak, they're this and this and that. They stop being an individual, and so in the way that the narcissist invents a fake identity, a fake persona, right? Who's grandiose, who's basically all the be all and end all. His true identity is subsumed under this false self, right? That's what the narcissist does. So that he doesn't actually exist. The only thing that exists is the false self, but there's no actual him. He ceases to exist, right? And subsumes himself under this false self. And then other people, so the borderline will do a similar thing, and right, where the false self, rather than being a sort of an invention of her own mind necessarily, she will then join the group, and the group will become a proxy for her sense of self, right? And it's generally it's quite common for women to do this, because women are very pro-social, right? They're all about the others and about the group and all that kind of stuff. So a woman generally, rather than have an identity, a true identity of her own, she will try to find that identity, that grandiose self, in the group. And then that is why, so for example, when you see the social justice warriors, the majority of them are women, and they are very, very heavily invested in these groups, right? And to the point that if you say anything bad about the group, you might say something about them, and they'll be like, yeah, and they're quite happy to have you insult them. But if you say anything about the group, they become rabid, like completely just like crazy, ridiculous sort of thing. And now I can't remember the T. I have to apologize. I don't know why I didn't write it down. So strengths, weakness, others, and and T flippin' hell, can't remember, sort of thing. I will put it in the description of the video below what the T stands for. And my sincere apology for getting, but that's the ADD for you. And obviously I cocked up my notes here, sort of thing. Anyway, so moving on, let's not dwell on that for too long, sort of thing. So you have your, so that SWOT analysis is for your sorry, that actually wasn't number 2, right? So T stands for traits. Threats stands for threats, right? Stands for threat, I remember. Right, so others and threats. So in your life you have threats. What is actually what are the issues and things that I need to deal with? What are actually threats to my happiness, threats to my, and others, people can actually be threats to you. A particular job could be a threat to you. A particular group could be a threat to you. Assessing correctly so for example, one of the things that you'll find is people who have a high sense of neuroticism, right, is they overestimate the amount of threats there are out in the world. So again, if we refer to social justice warriors again, right, you see that as far as the social justice warrior is concerned, everything in the world is a threat. Right? It's like Oprah, you have a gift under your seat, and you, we've all seen the meme, and you. So these are people with very high neuroticism, and if you look at the studies, you'll find that that is actually a feature of social justice warriors, that trait neuroticism is very, very high. People overestimate what kind of threats there are in the world. And so part of the reality testing is correctly assessing what kind of threats there are in the world, and even you yourself, you might even be a threat to yourself, right? So this is part of this the self-awareness and the self-knowledge kind of thing. Forgive me, I split self-awareness on self-knowledge. We're still on the first one, okay? Then it's not 1 and 2, it's just number 1, sort of thing. Self-awareness and self-knowledge, that's all in one package. So SWOT is, let me write this down here on the board actually. Right, threats. So strengths, weaknesses, others, and threats. Okay, so, and this is what needs to be understood, right? Your strength even your own strengths can be a threat to you if you rely on them too much. And we understand this, especially as Christians, right? Where if I become overly reliant on a particular strength, then that strength can in fact become a downfall, because it engenders pride and all of these kinds of things, right? And so there's a certain humility that needs to come with these kinds of things. So, and other people can be threats, and then just in your own immediate environment, people at work and stuff like that. What can I avoid? What do I have to work around? And so on and so forth, right? Am I a threat to myself, or is a certain person, or and it's very, very common. And the whole assessment of threats can be very, very difficult, because sometimes someone you might have really liked, like really, really liked and thought you loved and you thought you had this great bond, might actually turn out to be a threat to you, because they don't actually love you, right? And this is something you find again in one of the things that you find in the political sphere. The people on the right and the people on the left, they find it very, very difficult to understand that which they've put their allegiance in is actually a threat to them, is actually a threat to their very existence. On the left, you've got Black Lives Matter, you've got feminism and all that kind of stuff. These movements pretend to care about you, but they don't. They don't at all. They're pathological. They cause nothing but social unrest. They give you a false sense of identity. And then on the right, it's the same thing. The whole being capitalist and being whatever the hell it is, the religious and all these kinds of things, right? This pathologized forms of religion, pathologized forms of conservatism. And these things become tyrannical, right? Become tyrannical, become psychopathic, right? If there's too much, you need a degree of in-group preference and out-group hostility, but that can get too much to the point where you become tyrannical, you become empirical, right? You constant war in other places and all that kind of stuff, force everyone else to be like me. Both sides do that sort of thing, but both things are a threat to who you actually really, really genuinely are in the core in yourself. And so let's moving on to number 2, right? Number 2, we've got self-acceptance. All right, so that's your SWOT there. So the first step, right, is these little hairs. My hair gets everywhere, I tell you. It's like I can vacuum today and tomorrow there's a million dust bunnies all over the place, right? Self-knowledge. Right? Self-knowledge. And awareness. And I'm not talking about mindfulness here, right? Mindfulness is a fad. Okay? And in mindfulness is a, just as a side note, I might be going a little bit overboard with these things, but the whole mindfulness trend is a fad. And not only that, it's a narcissistic fad, because the mindfulness, the reason why it becomes pathologized is because, and narcissistic is not, what a narcissist does is it takes external objects and it internalizes them, right? It's this collapse of the, it's almost like if you're thinking about philosophy, there's almost like a modal collapse all into an one internal thing, right? And this is what mindfulness tends to end up being, where the person actually becomes self-absorbed, right? And that's actually narcissistic. It's a problem, which is why most of the stuff out there, you need to be very careful. The vast majority of self-help stuff out there is teaching you how to be a narcissist. It's not actually teaching you how to love yourself. All right. At all. Okay. And then number 2 is self-acceptance. Self-acceptance, right? So it makes a lot of sense. So earlier on I said you need to have self-knowledge and self-awareness, and it's a sort of a logical progression, and then self-acceptance sort of thing, right? So if you don't have self-awareness, you can't have self-knowledge, right? Because you're not aware of yourself. What are you gonna have knowledge of if you're not aware of it? Okay. And then self-acceptance. Well, if you don't know who you are, if you don't have self-knowledge, then what are you accepting? There's nothing to accept. So you've got to go through. It's chronological, this process. Self-acceptance. And this, for most people, is one of the most, actually the whole thing is just bloody difficult, but depending on who you are, it's one of the most difficult things, because you need to accept who you are, right? And now, here's the thing. A condition of self-acceptance is that it must be unconditional, right? Unconditional. And it must be compassionate, all right? If you say, I accept myself, but, or accept myself if, then that's not self-acceptance at all. It means I accept myself in spite of, right? I've got a pimple on my backside, but doesn't matter. I accept myself. Or I'm a dishonest person. Doesn't matter. I accept who I am. I can fix that, right? And this is where where again the faith comes in. A lot of people, and I encounter this all the time, dealing with people who have gone through drugs, who've gone through alcohol, who've been on the streets, who've been whatever the hell the case might be, right? They have this strange idea that I cannot come to God unless I have achieved X, Y, and Z. Until I'm become perfect. Well, if that's the case, then you will never come to God. It's like you cannot become perfect unless you come to God. right? Therefore, if you wait until you're perfect before you come to God, you'll never come to God, and therefore you'll never be perfect, right? And this is why we say the love of God is unconditional, because he will take you as you are. It doesn't mean he's going to let you remain that way, because that would not be love, right? Because true love, remember, recognizes who you truly are, but then also works for your benefit, right? Remember what we said. Are you pursuing good goals, good achievements, things that are good for you? And if I am dishonest, then then self-love means that I acknowledge the fact that I'm dishonest, and self-love also means that I take measures to improve on that, to get better goals, because being dishonest is going to get me is going to ruin my life. It's going to end, and I'm going to end up in prison. I'm going to alienate people. I'm going to lie to myself, which then destroys the self-love and all these kinds of things, right? So this is why we say that the love of God is unconditional. He accepts you exactly how you are right this instant, right this very instant. End of story. He accepts you as you are. You come as you are, right? And this idea that I must change before God can accept me, or before I can accept myself, is nonsense. You need to accept yourself exactly who you are now, and stop with the disgust, and stop with the condemnation, and stop with the whatever the hell it is in your mind. Accept who you are as you are right now. Right? You acknowledge that there's things about yourself that are good, and there's things that are about yourself that are not so good, that are bad, that need working on. Fair enough, but you accept who you are. Self-acceptance. It is unconditional, and it's compassionate. As soon as you say, I accept myself when, and this is where materialism comes in, right? This is the problem with the modern world of materialism. I accept myself when I've got the good job, when I've got political power, when I've got political representation. I accept myself when I'm popular. I accept myself when I've got 10,000 followers. I accept myself if I have this shoe, or this car, or this job, or this title. That's not self-acceptance. It's not self-acceptance at all. And it is for this reason that you see people who, with this whole materialism thing, that base their identity, people who base their identity on the acquisition of something, that you see that no matter how much they get, they're never happy. Because here's the problem. Most pursuits in life, if this is how you're going about it, means that you need to sacrifice who you are in order to achieve these things. So let's make an example. Again, not that I want to pick on feminists, but feminism is a very, very good thing. Feminists want more women to be CEOs, right? However, if you are a CEO, you have no life. Therefore, whatever money, whatever status and stuff like that you would enjoy from that position, you do not have the corresponding life that will allow you to enjoy those things. This is why most CEOs are divorced. Their children don't know who they are. Their children probably hate them. They've got 5 divorces, right? And they end up, like you see these celebrities crashing their cars on the news today. Tiger Woods crashed his car. He's been through how many wives now, sort of thing, doing drugs and all that. These people have got everything, as far as we can tell. They want for nothing, yet they're miserable. Why? Because if the acquisitions of these things requires that you don't exist, that you don't be someone, then once you've got these things, there's no one there to enjoy it. So who are you getting these things for? Right? For whom are you doing these things? Can't be for you, because you are sacrificing yourself in the process. And this is the problem with feminism. Feminism is saying we need to get more women into the high echelons of society. We need to get women into science and tech and mathematics. Well, what if a woman, in order to do that, needs to give up who she really is? Needs to give up on what she really wants in order to do that? Then are you doing the woman a service, or are you doing her a disservice? You're doing her a disservice because she has to sacrifice who she is in order to get that. And here's one of the fascinating things. Now that many, many women are finding themselves out in the workplace and being either the main breadwinner or the only breadwinner in a home. Now this situation of coronavirus has hit. Do you have any idea how many women are committing suicide? Young women in the 30s and late 20s, 30s, up to their 40s, committing suicide. The rate, here's an interesting thing to think about. Men successfully used to commit suicide and actually succeed much more often than women. Men were killing themselves left, right, and center. Now that women have gone into the workplace and become like men, women are beginning to kill themselves are slowly but surely beginning to kill themselves at the same rate that men are. Why? Because like men, many of these men not only are not only now are women for the first time subject to the same world pressure and threats and existential crisis when you lose a job and all these kinds of things, as men are. But many women, like men, are having to sacrifice who they are for the sake of having these jobs, and for the sake of having these jobs so that they can have the house, so that they can have the car, so that they can have the cell phone, so that they can have the holidays, so that they can feel like they're someone. And when all of these things collapse and they're taken away, I have an existential crisis. Who am I? And they associate themselves with these identities. And we need to make this distinction. Self-awareness means that you are aware of yourself, who you are. And we must make a distinction between the core identity and a peripheral identity. The peripheral identity is not who you really are. The peripheral identity changes all the time. The vast majority of things that we think are part of our identity are not in fact part of our core identity. The core identity is the thing or collection of things that never changes no matter what. It's who you really are no matter what. Whether you are a CEO or whether you are a street sweeper. Right? Is who you really are. So, when we look out in the world, we see people, they identify with Black Lives Matter, or they identify with feminism, or they identify with Donald Trump, or they identify with Republicanism, or they identify with their job. When I ask them, we ask each other, well, so what do you do? Well, I'm a physician, or I'm an engineer, or I'm a what? These are peripheral identities because these things can change. You have not always been an engineer. You are an engineer now, but you might lose that job and you might cease to be an engineer. And then in order to make ends meet, you might need to become a packer or a chef or something else. And because we attach ourselves, because we pretend that these things are our core identity, therefore, when these things change, we have a complete meltdown because our whole sense of self comes tumbling down. It falls apart. Who am I? Right? And people then have this existential crisis and they go completely crazy, and some people end up killing themselves. It's because these things are not who you are. Even this whole thing with race, what does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be Hispanic? And you see all of these ridiculous identities coming out. This is part of my identity. The reason why the world is so obsessed with with this identitarian politics is because no one knows who they actually are. That's why they're obsessed with this garbage. That's why you have identity politics right down at the bloody core. That's why you have identity politics, because what you actually have is a bunch of people running around who do not know who the hell they are, because they do not love themselves, they do not love each other. And the reason like that is because these people were not loved. They themselves have never been loved, and they were never taught how to love themselves, which is why they don't love each other. This is why they go running around on the streets killing each other. Whether it's the idiot Trump supporters running into those political offices, I forget, sort of thing, and beating people up on the streets, or whether it's Black Lives Matter burning their own neighborhoods down. It's the same bloody thing. It's mental illness, all of it. A woman marching around as if the right to breastfeed in public. You know, oh, we can't slut shame. Since when is being a slut a part of your identity? Since when is being promiscuous? How is being promiscuous? How is sex part of your identity? It's got nothing to do with anything. And the same thing with the LGBT. I identify as whatever the hell the case might. Your sexuality is not part of your identity. I have news for you. It doesn't matter whether you're heterosexual or whether you're homosexual or whether you're bisexual or whether you whatever the hell it is, that's sexual sort of thing. That is not who you are. And so now I might have an objection from everyone, not only from the heterosexual, who's like, especially the Christian, how dare you? Didn't God make man and woman and this? No. I have news for you, Christians. When you go to heaven, what's going to happen? We're going to be like the angels. We're not going to have a sexual orientation, are we? We're not going to be having sex in heaven. We're not going to be getting married to each other in heaven. So if that was part of your identity, does that mean that you are no longer the same person when you go to heaven and you stop and these physical parts of yourself are no longer the case? The concept of heterosexual or whatever sexual is not going to exist in heaven because we're not going to be doing these things. So how the hell is that part of your identity? So whether you're heterosexual or whether you're homosexual or whatever the hell it is, that is not part of your identity. I identify as, I don't care. That's not who you are. In the core, because it can change. The very existence of homosexuality proves positive that sexuality can be altered, can change. It's not constant, right? Trauma easily, right? There's many women out there. They're in a marriage with a man. The guy is an abusive son of a gun, or he traumatizes the living hell out of her in some way. The divorce is a nightmare, absolute nightmare. The woman can develop in that process such an aversion to everything masculine that she will become a lesbian afterwards. And it happens all the time, where a woman goes through these catastrophic divorces and then they end up getting married to a woman. Why? Because the desire for love and affection and physical intimacy doesn't go away. But because they develop such an aversion to the man, because they mistakenly take this one man as the example, as the icon of all men, because they make that mistake, they then develop an aversion to mankind in general, and then because they so need love and affection and physical contact, that they then I must be lesbian, and then they go and they become lesbian. It's not because it's got nothing to do with sexuality at that point. Nothing at all. Right? These things are not consistent. They can change. A straight person can become homosexual. A homosexual can become straight. Because for sexuality is here. Sex is not just a physical thing. We're psychological beings, for the most part, right? So this is how you have, there's this acceptance. I must accept myself. I must accept myself, right? Unconditionally. This is who I am. I accept who I am. Forget about making other... And now here's the thing. Why? One of the phenomenon that you see with people who do not accept themselves, right? They do not accept themselves, and who lack the rest of the things that I'm about to talk about. So let me just put it here on the board for you, right? So the other things is also trust and self-trust and self-efficacy. Actually, what I was about to say, I'm going to put it a little bit later. So that's self-acceptance. I accept myself, who I am. And let me tell you, when you accept yourself, you will stop insisting that everyone else accept you all the time. Because this is all you see in the world, isn't it? Right? People parading around, insisting, forcing, you have to accept me. You have to accept me. You have to accept me. I identify as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you have to accept me, right? Everyone is obsessed with self-accept, with forcing everyone in the world to accept them. This is why most Christians will quote this verse, love thy neighbor as myself. They're quoting it not because they are only quoting it because they are actually saying, please love me. That's what they're actually saying. Please love me because I do not love myself. That's what they're actually saying. This is why most Christians quote that verse ad nauseum and completely ignore the love your neighbor as thyself. They completely ignore that self-directed love, completely ignore it, and ad nauseum, you must love your neighbor, you must love your neighbor, you must love your neighbor, you must accept your neighbor, you must be nice to your neighbor, you must be nice to each other all the time. Why are so many people running around that they're trying to force the world to like them? It's because they don't like themselves. And so they have to get it from, if they can't establish, and this is something you need to understand, if people cannot establish something from within, they're going to try and force it from the outside. It's what they call an external, you start seeing people have an external locus of control, and they externalize their identity, they externalize everything. Which is why the group then becomes so important. The group, the political party, the whatever, like the veganism. Veganism is another thing. It's just this, veganism is no longer actually about health, about living a healthy lifestyle, right? At this point in time, I don't care whether you agree with veganism or whether you're not, or whether you agree, but the argument between people who eat meat and people who eat vegetables is no longer about which one is actually healthy for you. It's become a question of a person's identity. Right? It's a question of identity. That's all it is. People are trying, it's peripheral identity. And because people do not know who they actually are, because they do not accept themselves, therefore they insist that everyone else accept them. Right? They demand that everyone else accept them, and the more the better. Right? And here's a problem with the self-acceptance, right? With self-acceptance. Why is it so important? It's at this point of self-acceptance, you've seen the good and the bad, and you integrate that shadow, you come face to face with who you really are. Now here's a problem. There is a phenomena that happens to a lot of people at this point. It is something that is known as ego dystonia. That process can be highly ego dystonic, and the reaction that people have to this, having themselves presented to them in all its detail and all its glory, right? I come face to face with myself. A lot of people will reject that. They will reject it later. They might reject it later, but that reaction where they fall apart, where it's like a existential, the illusion, the fantasy has been shattered, and here's this. It's like you're looking at yourself as if you're a stranger, and it boggles your mind. It's like it's actually in its way almost a little bit traumatizing. And the word for that experience is abreaction or narcissistic mortification, where you're just like, am I really like that? And the problem is that you can reject that. And you can go into almost like a state of mourning, because the person you thought you were dies. Okay? Now, as a Christian, does this ring a bell? The man of sin must die, that false self must die. Right? Something needs to be killed off. Yeah? Something needs to be killed off. And you're going to mourn like someone, as if someone's died, because you died. You die. Well, at least who you thought you were dies. And you will mourn that person as if that was another person that died. That's how badly it is. Now, this is why, remember, I talked to you about the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Ladies and gentlemen, this is when you get self-knowledge and self-awareness. Right? You realize exactly who and what you are. And for the most part, you are going to realize that you're poor in spirit. And are you going to mourn when you realize that? Yeah, you're going to mourn. You're going to mourn. This is what it means. But God promises you will be comforted. You will be comforted. This is why you mourn, ladies and gentlemen, because the part of you that you thought you are is going to die, and you're going to mourn that person, and you're also going to mourn, you're going to feel bad when you're like, man, am I really like that? It's a hard thing to accept. You know what? I'm not as nice as I thought I was. Right? And there's going to be a lot of regret. There's going to be a lot of guilt. There's going to be a lot of shame. Right? This is why you need to accept yourself. Say, yes, guilt. Yeah, that's all there. And this is what Satan tries to do. That's why Satan's the accuser, right? That's why because Satan gets in there. He's the accuser. Yeah, you are a miserable son of a gun, you. Right? And you've got these internal voices that are given it. These internal voices are called introjects, right? An introject is a voice that was always external, but that you've taken that voice and you've made it internal. So that voice is not really you. It's not your voice. It's a voice that you've internalized. And that voice can be that of a bad parent, of a narcissistic parent, a psychopathic parent. For the most part. Parents that told you we're dumb, or parents who ignored you, or parents that gave you conditional love. I will only love you if you do X, Y, and Z for me. Otherwise, I will reject you. Right? The vast majority of children today, they experience conditional love. They experience dead parents, rejecting parents, conditional parents. That's what most people today experience. The vast majority of us. And in a way, we must try not to be angry about it, because yes, this is our experience of our parents. But the reason they are like that is because that's what their parents were like to them. This is one of the reasons that this whole process, why we mourn, when you realize this, because one of your reactions is that you want to get angry with your parents, the people who did wrong by you. But when you understand, like Jesus did, right? Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing. When you realize that the only reason these people are the way they are is because their parents treated them the same way, then you start having a dissonance, because like, I need to actually have compassion on these people who did wrong by me, because they did not have the training. They didn't know how to love either. And their parents did that to them. My grandparents did that to my parents because they didn't know how to love either. They were mistreated. And the cycle goes. This is what we call the eternal cycle of violence. This is why the Bible said that the sins of the father will follow to the third and the fourth generation. The cycle of violence, and someone has to break that cycle. And you break that cycle by learning how to love yourself, and by practicing how to love yourself, and as an extension, how to love other people around you. That's the only way you break the cycle. That's it. Forget about stupid politics. Forget about Black Lives Matter and feminism. Forget about capitalism and socialism and republicanism and America and Americanism or Britishism or China, and forget about and your culture. Forget about that crap. That stuff is artificial. It's psychotic. These things do not. These are artificial things that don't actually exist. These things are fake. These things are nonsensical, idiotic, desperate attempts for people to have some kind of an identity. These things are fake. They're not true. They don't actually exist out in the world. Forget about all this crap. You break the cycle of violence by learning to love yourself and learning to love others through this process, right? That's how you're going to do it. And this is why you become meek, right? When you realize you're not as great as you thought you were, and you have that compassion on yourself, like I was saying, you realize that other people are just like you. And rather than be arrogant, you're going to become meek. You're going to become humble, and you're going to be merciful to other people. You're going to be like, you know what? You're that way because you were traumatized as well. You were abused as well, right? When you look at your parent who treated you badly, and you're like, you know what? I forgive you, because, man, the way you treated me made me not a very good person. Because you rejected me, because you traumatized me, because you abused me and stuff like that, and I became like you. I don't know how to love. I don't know how to love myself. I don't know how to love my neighbor. I treat people badly. I treat myself badly. I self-sabotage. I do all these things. And you know what? That was because of you. And the only reason you're that way is because your parents were like that, and their parents were like that. So, hey, man, we're all the same. And so you start having that compassion, not only on yourself, but on others, because you realize, bloody hell, man, we're all in the same damn boat. We're in the same boat here. And that's when you become meek and you become humble. And you start having that compassion for other people. Like, hey, but compassion does not mean ignoring the bad. It does not mean ignoring the bad. Because if you ignore the bad, it's narcissism. That's all it is. It's narcissism. You're inflating your own ego, and you're inflating the ego of others. True love is like, I see the good and I see the bad. And we're in this together, good and bad, right? There's both. As long as it has to be balanced. As soon as it's one to the exclusion of the other, you have a pathology, and it's wrong. And it's going to destroy people. It's going to destroy you. Right? Which is why, even though the world looks like it's preaching love, it's not. It's preaching narcissism. It's saying you need to be a narcissist, and you need to help the other person become a narcissist. And then they wonder, whoa, why are we all abusing each other? Why do we all hate each other? Why can we not seem to get along with each other? That's why. Because the organizing principle in the world is abject narcissism. We are literally constantly teaching other how to not love, and getting in the way of that. And so you become meek. It's like, you know what, I'm not actually that good, And you know what? You're not that good either, but I'm not that good. And all right, but we both have our strong points. Maybe we can uplift each other and try to get somewhere together, perhaps, and start treating each other right. And unconditional love does not mean I turn a blind eye to what's wrong. Unconditional love means I accept you as a whole package, but it also means that, hey, I acknowledge what's good and I acknowledge what's bad, and we work on it. We work on it. And when you work on it, what happens? Right? Which hunger? You're going to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Once you get this knowledge, you're going to be like, damn, how can I do better? How can I start generating good things? And what am I going to be? I'm going to be merciful. Right? And once you've done that, you become pure in heart. And once you've done that, what happens? Then you're going to become a peacemaker. The world is trying to do this without doing that. And when the world tries to do this without doing that, what do? They become persecutors. I said, blessed are they which are persecuted. If you do all of this, you're going to be persecuted by the world, right? And the world it becomes persecutors. Why? Because they don't know how to love. Because instead of engendering true love, they are actually cultivating narcissism. And that's why they become persecutors. Because that's what narcissists do. All of the persecutors and oppressors and tyrants and bullies and stuff like that in the world are narcissists, are psychopaths, are borderlines, are people with mental disorders. People have mental disorders, personality disorders. There's something wrong there. The lack of self-love. And then when you realize that this condition is common to basically everyone in the world, then what do you realize? Everyone is both victim and oppressor at the same time. Crazy, huh? And it is only the narcissist who wants to point the finger. Oh, you are, and do you hear that? Oppressor this, oppressor that, right? That's all you hear about these days, ad nauseum. They want to be accepted, but there's no talk whatsoever about them accepting others in kind. So let's continue, right? And you need self-trust. A lot of people don't have it. A lot of people don't have it. Self-trust. You need to realize, and one of the reasons why people don't have self-trust is because, well, life tends to, you get knocked and you get knocked and you get knocked, and you do this thing and you fail, and you do the next thing and you fail, and you do the next thing and you fail. And if you've spent all of your life not loving yourself, well, let's think about it like this, right? Someone who blatantly doesn't love you, are you going to trust them? No. Of course not. Okay? You're going to develop mistrust because everything they do seems to end up badly for you, right? And so if you don't love yourself and things constantly end up badly for you because you're self-sabotage without realizing, and this is the thing, people don't realize they're doing it. Constantly self-sabotaging all these things, guess what? They're not going to trust themselves. They're going to think, you know what? I don't have my best interests in mind. I'm my own worst enemy. Have you heard people say that a lot? I'm my own worst enemy. They stop believing that they actually want, and because deep down at bottom, we actually do want the best for ourselves, right? You do all of this and learn to trust yourself. Learn to trust, you know what? I actually really do have my own best interests at heart. The execution might be crappy, I could maybe develop some skills, do like Jordan Peterson says, right? Clean your room, right? We all really, really want our rooms to be clean, right? So trust at least, and accept at least the fact that you want your room to be clean. You might not be very good at achieving that, but hey, trust yourself. You know what? Yeah, I actually, yeah, I really do want the best for myself. Genuinely, right? But you can't get to this point until you've done that, until you've accepted yourself. Because if you try to trust yourself, if you haven't accepted yourself, you're not going to trust yourself. Okay, so this is why it's chronological, right? You can't trust someone who's rejected you. If you keep so this is only possible if you've done that. Once you've done that, you'll be like, hey, I actually do. I've accepted myself. You're cool. All right. Maybe I can trust myself. Now I actually have best interest in mind, right? I can start going somewhere, right? You need that. You've got to have that, right? Self-trust. I have my best interest in mind. I like myself. I want good things for myself. Cool, man. I'm not going to lie to myself anymore. Or at least I'm going to try, right? I'm not going to deceive myself anymore. I'm going to avoid projecting things which aren't true into the world. I'm going to avoid projecting things that aren't true onto myself, right? I'm going to stop doing these things. I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to stop doing that, right? I've got this insight now. I've got this self-knowledge. I've got this self-acceptance. I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to do the right thing, okay? You feel better for it. You feel better for it, right? Because we look at the Beatitudes, and you've done your mourning. You're going to mourn. Let me tell you, you're going to mourn. This is hard. This is not easy. You're going to mourn. You're going to cry. You're going to suffer. But you're going to like it. Right? You're going to like it. Trust yourself. And then the last one, self-efficacy. Self-efficacy means you believe that you can set goals and accomplish them. Right? I can set goals and I can accomplish those goals. And here's the interesting thing, right? Contrary to popular belief, right? That means your own personal opinion of yourself and even of others. The vast majority of people in the world are in fact self-efficacious, right? If you are alive, it means you are self-efficacious, right? The only time you are not self-efficacious is when you are an infant. You can't walk, you can't talk, you can't do anything, right? But as you get older and older, you become more and more self-efficacious. If you decide, listen, even if you want something bad for yourself, right? I want drugs. Well, you are perfectly efficacious because you seem quite capable of getting drugs, don't you? Guess what? It means you're self-efficacious. It means you can set goals and you can achieve them. Same thing with alcohol. Somehow, you manage to get alcohol whenever you want. You're never short. Do I want to go get bread? Do I want to cook dinner? Are you alive, right? If you are alive, it means that you are self-efficacious. It means you've done all these things. It means you feed yourself, you bathe yourself, you do all of these kinds of things, right? The vast majority of people in the world are self-efficacious, right? With the exception of people who are severely mentally disabled in some way, or paraplegic, or there's some they're lying in bed in a coma, or some horrible disease that's completely just wiped them out, and they have to be fed, and they have to, whatever the case might be, people with some severe disability, whatever the case might be. But even most people with disabilities are self-efficacious. Me, I've got Tourette's, I've got attention deficit disorder, and they're hell. And I myself have some personality disorders, and guess what? I'm still alive. I can go to work every day. I can get some money. I've got a wife. I can love her, and I can, hey, bloody hell. Turns out I can actually do a lot, Same with you. You actually can achieve a lot of things, and not just simple things either. Things that are complicated, right? That are of in the future. I can pay rent. I can pay my things. I can actually do something, right? I can go to the shop and buy some food, and I can cook that food. And these animals can't do that, right? These things are actually quite complicated, right? Aren't they? And you got to believe you're self-efficacious. And now here's the problem with people that do not believe that they are self-efficacious. It comes associated with phenomena. Remember I was talking about earlier on, I mentioned it earlier on, I talked about an external locus of control. If you have an external locus of control, it means that I do not believe that the things that happen to me I have no control over my life. Everything that happens in the world happens to me. It's not me doing something and having a result transpire, right? Everything in the world happens to me, and I've got no control over what happens, right? And this is then where you actually get victim mentality, right? People who are the perpetual victim, who are victim all the time, you know immediately, external locus of control. They don't feel like they have control over anything at all. At all. Therefore, every single thing that happens in life happens to them. So they perceive themselves. So when we are infants, that is true. Everything happens to us because we have no self-efficacy. We're helpless. Everything that happens to us. And then we start getting a little bit older. You learn to work. You learn how to do things. You can start doing things for yourself. You can start acting on the world, right? I have a control over the world. I can do this and get that result. I can do that and I can get that result and all that kind of stuff. Now, no one has absolute control over everything in the world, obviously. Okay? No one has absolute control. You know, sometimes you are, and sometimes you are actually controlled by other people. You go to school, hey, you're under control by the teachers and they're telling you what to do your homework, your parents, whatever the case might be. But also a large part of your life is a balance between being control over yourself and everything you can be in control of, and all the things you can't be. So there's that prayer, right? Lord, please help me to accept the things I cannot change and help me to change the things that I can. It's that balance, right? So you have a healthy idea. So when the people do not develop, right, trauma, so let's say you're in the path of development, wherever you are traumatized, that development gets stunted. It stops developing. That's what trauma does. Trauma cuts you off. You're like, you've got a piece of bamboo that's growing. Trauma comes and cuts it off and seals the end so it can't grow. It cannot grow anymore, right? So in many ways, it's not even like so if you cut so you've got 5 pieces of bamboo and you come and you cut one, and so the others grow and you keep the thing alive, so you keep feeding it and all that kind of stuff, so it'll still grow, but it'll be slightly behind everything else, but it's still growing. Trauma cuts it off and poisons the roots so that all development stops. So then when you're dealing with an adult who has an external locus of control, you're dealing with someone who perceives themselves as if they were still 5 months old with no control over anything, that everything happens to them. That's literally the kind of person you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone whose perception of their their self-efficacy is like that of an infant child, which is then why they have tantrums and stuff the way they do out in the world. Do you see that happening, by the way? Right? You see that happening all the time. Again, feminism, Black Lives Matter, all these kinds of things. And now here's the problem. A person who has an external locus of control, you find that they never get anywhere. For some reason, their situation never improves. Never improves. Right? And they always demand and so because they feel like they can't. So what does an infant do? Because the infant has an external locus of control, the infant then needs to manipulate the environment in order to get what it wants, because it can't do it itself. So what does the infant do in order to try and manipulate the environment? The infant starts to cry. And then here comes mother running, right? So, dear mummy, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to cry. And I'm going to continue crying, and you're not going to get a wink of sleep, and you're eventually going to give me what I want. Now, that's fine when you're dealing with an infant. But when you're dealing with an adult, suddenly it's not acceptable anymore. And this is what all social justice movements are. Right? This is why you have a welfare state. This is why you have, all of these groups are constantly saying to the government, give me this, give me that, give me that, give me that, give me the next, give me. It's like, excuse me, why can't you get these things for yourself? So you understand what I'm saying? And then so you got then like feminism. Oh, men, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's like, excuse me, I thought you guys wanted. The whole point of feminism, I thought, was so that you could do things for yourself. Why are you constantly go and do it, right? But then you're getting companies. We need to encourage women to do this and encourage women to do that, encourage women to do that, and the next thing and the next thing. And men need to do this and men need to do this and men need to do that. It's like, feminism is strangely focused a lot on men. Why? It doesn't make sense. Why are they so focused on what men do or don't do or think or don't think or say or what they don't say or what they... It's because it's an external locus of control. Feminists or feminism, by its very action, does not believe that women actually have self-efficacy, which is why men need to do everything. Do you see how pathological it is, right? Someone who says to a woman, listen, you carry on. If you really think that women are like men and capable of everything that men can do, then you would say to her, carry on. You get on with it then. Because that's what you would do for a man. Why? And why would you do it for a man? Because you believe that the man is self-efficacious. Well, he can get on with it. This is why we generally don't feel sympathy for men. Right? We feel sorry for women. We want to baby women. We want to protect women and all that kind of stuff. Why? Why this disparity? Because we believe that men have self-efficacy, but we don't believe that women do. Right? And so that's why you have that lopsided bigotry. Feminism is actually a form of bigotry. Right? Because it's constantly men this and men that and men that. It's like what today stops a woman from opening her own business? Nothing. There is nothing today that stops a woman or a black person or a minor or from doing whatever they want. Nothing. Now, whilst it was true, remember what I said. Sometimes we are controlled by things. So obviously, in the old days, women were actively barred from doing certain things. And yes, those things were not fair. They weren't right, of course. Absolutely. No worries. Definitely. But the concept of self-efficacy, even though women are now, and women and blacks and Hispanics and Brazilians and Chinese and everyone, you're free to do whatever you want. The reason they don't is because they are yet to realize that they can. That's why they don't. There's no self-trust, there's no self-efficacy. This is why they're constantly asking people. And this is the psychological mechanism there. If I don't have self-efficacy, if I don't believe that I can make things happen in the world, that I believe that everything happens to me, rather it's the world is acting on me rather than me acting on the world. I am always at the whim of other people, so I'm subject to other people's moods, to other people's wealth, to other people's. I'm always relying on these. So my entire existence depends on all these external things. What does the first person eventually will start doing? They will externalize everything. So rather than be internal and be like, what can I do? What can I manage? Let me see what I can do, right? Internal, and this can be an individual or can be a group of people. Rather than pull in and, you know what, let me get things in order because I believe I actually can do something and achieve something, right? Because I don't believe I can do this, that no matter what I do, the external world is going to shoot me down. I then become obsessed with the external world. So I ignore myself, right? I ignore myself. I ignore my own development because obviously there's no point. I mean, why am I going to waste valuable resources on myself if I can't do anything anyway? So I will become obsessed with the external world, with what is the world doing? What is the world thinking? What is the world going to do? Or the external world or other people. What are they thinking? What are they doing? What do they think of me? Do they like me? Do they hate me? Are they going to punish me? Are they going to... Everything about you becomes about others all the time. There's this obsession with other people. You literally expend all of you. So so you see this with children who are abused, right? And stuff like that. They're constantly trying to do things to please mommy and daddy, right? Why? Is it because they love mommy and daddy? No. It's because they're trying to prevent another beating. It's because they're trying to prevent another round of abuse. So they become obsessed. What is mommy doing? What does mommy feel? How does mommy feel? How does daddy feel? How can I manipulate mommy and daddy in order to get what I want? And weirdly enough, that is actually a form of self-efficacy. If you can manipulate them, that's a form of self-efficacy, isn't it? But people don't realize it is. If you can manipulate mommy and daddy, that's it's underhanded, but it's self-efficacious, isn't it? Because you are acting upon the world in order to achieve a result. So guess what? You have self-efficacy, right? But the obsession becomes external. It's constantly external. I have to and this is why you see in the world today, everyone is obsessed with everyone else. Have you noticed? The liberals are obsessed with the conservatives. The conservatives are obsessed with the liberals. Black Lives Matter is obsessed with white people. Feminism is obsessed with men. If feminism spent as much energy with women as it does trying to constantly fight men at every turn, women would be in a completely different place today. Completely different place. If Black Lives Matter spent as much time, so we think, I did a video a while back, Black Lives Matter have generated $1 billion in donations. Not a cent. And the black community doesn't see a single cent. Not a penny. Black people are still languishing. They're still languishing in ghettos, with drive-by shootings and bad schools, bad neighborhoods. Why? This makes no sense. Where does the money all go? The money goes to the politicians. Why? It's an external locus of control. The money doesn't go into the community because the community does not trust itself, has no sense of self-efficacy, has no sense of self-trust. So where does the money and the resources go? They go externally. They go outside. That's why. And it is the activists who will ensure, that will guarantee that black people will never trust themselves, will never have self-efficacy. Guarantees. Why? Because the activists benefit from having a community that is externally dependent on them for everything, because they want to be your savior. And this is the thing. So the relationship between those who participate in activism, the community, and the activists who are lobbying government, it's what in psychology is called merger and fusion, right? If I do not have self-efficacy, if I do not have self-trust, right, then what I do is I merge with another entity and I fuse with them. And I cease to exist. I cease to exist as an individual. and I merge and I fuse with this external entity who is going to do all of these things for me. And that is the relationship that the black community has with the activists, and that the activists have with the politicians. Also, feminists, that women have with feminism and the activists, because they do not have a sense of self-efficacy. They do not, so they merge and fuse with these things. So then when you criticize feminism or you criticize Black Lives Matter, these people think you're criticizing them when you're not criticizing them. To criticize Black Lives Matter is not the same thing as criticizing as a black person. To criticize feminism is not the same thing as criticizing a woman. It's not the same thing. But because they've merged and fused, they then perceive this thing to be part of their core identity when it actually is not. It's a peripheral identity. And that's why you can't talk to them. That's why you can't talk to these people. The same thing with Republicans. It's the same thing with Republicans, right? You've got the white supremacy and the nationalism and all that kind of, I'm an American. What the hell does it mean to be an American? It's a meaningless statement, because America 100 years ago is not the same as America today, and America in 20, 30 years' time is not going to be the same as America. The word, I'm an American, is meaningless. It's a meaningless statement. It's psychotic. I'm an American. It's psychotic. It's the same thing as saying I'm Chinese or I'm whatever. Other than a statement of fact, as in, I was born in this place, it means nothing. In this geographical location, it is otherwise meaningless. It's a meaningless statement, because what it means to be an American is completely different from generation to generation. Completely different. It means something completely different. It's a meaningless statement. It's psychotic. There's no such thing as an American then. So when we cling to this thing, this nationalism, it's psychotic. It's not any, it doesn't mean anything. It's not anything. Right? If I tell you I'm a Brazilian, the only thing that should communicate to you is where I was born. It tells you nothing else about me. Right? And then we sit here and we think, why am I getting stereotyped? Well, obviously, if you want to make this one stupid thing as part of your identity, and you're going to allow that thing to dictate how you behave, then obviously you're going to behave like everyone else instead of behaving like an individual. You will never behave like an individual for as long as you keep on ignoring your core identity and keep believing that these external things are real when they are actually not. And they change all the time. America used to be a republic. Now it's a democracy. Tomorrow is going to be a tyranny. It's quickly going that way. It's quickly going that way. America is going to become a tyranny in no time. The whole Western world is going to become one massive tyranny in no time. The Western world of today is not the same as it was 30 or 40 years ago even. Now, especially with this coronavirus business, where they're wanting to bring in passports and restrict your freedom, and these restrictions on freedom of speech and all these kinds of things. It's not the same. We don't live in the same place we did 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We're living in a completely different place. We're not living... The UK is not the same place. I live in the UK now. The UK today is not the same place it was 10 years ago or 40 years ago. It's not the same place anymore. So what does it mean to be British? And you want to talk about the culture. It's the culture. It's not the culture. The culture changes as well. Once upon a time, the UK was Catholic. The next time, then it was Protestant. Then it was atheistic, and then it was some. So what the hell does it mean to be? It's meaningless. It's not anything. You invented something and you projected it outwards because you don't know who you are. That's why. And you get a sense of who you are from fake things that exist outside. And as far as God is concerned, the Bible's concerned, it's like, stop that nonsense. When Jesus came down, it's like, forget about all this rubbish. Love one another, love God and love each other and love yourself. Then you can be a genuine person. Then you can be a real person. Then you can actually be effective in the world, and you can treat each other well. You can have community, and then life will change from the ground up. We can't change it from the top down with all this politics and forcing people to like us and doing drugs, or becoming a rock punk whatever, or becoming a vegan, or becoming a, these things are, this is meaningless stuff. Meaningless. It's all of it meaningless. And that's what it means to have self-love, right? Self-knowledge. Self-awareness. Who are you? What's all this? Right? What's all this? What am I doing when I do something, when I say something? What am I saying? What am I doing? Really? You know? Self-acceptance. You know what? I actually did that. And you know what? I don't know why I did that. That's the truth, you know? I don't know why I did that. You know what? I believed something. I did that because I believe in something that actually doesn't belong to me. I've got this ideology from Donald Trump in my head, or from Joe Biden in my head, or from Barack Obama in my head, right? I've got this ideology from Black Lives Matter, or from feminism, or from capitalism, or from socialism. I've got this ideology in my head. It's like, do I actually believe any of those things? Right? I accept the fact that I believe stuff that doesn't belong to me. I accept the fact that I behave like an idiot. Right. Man, I accept that even though I did these stupid things, that I can still work towards my best. I can still do something. Right? This self-loathing or this pride, it's pathetic, it's useless. Why be proud? Where does pride get? It gets you nowhere. It gets you nowhere. Self-acceptance. Don't reject. It's like, yes, I have these strengths, I have these weaknesses, I have these things in my life. Learn to trust myself and learn I can actually do something. I can actually do something. Right? And you get this problem. You see this pathology in religion a lot, by the way. Right? Religion. When I spoke that video that I did a while ago, about 50 Shades of Jesus, right? Where people are projecting false concepts of God, of Jesus, these false concepts, right? People do all this stuff in religion as well. Religion itself can be a psychotic thing, right? People take whatever and they cast it out there. This is the religion. And none of it is true. That's what the Pharisees did, right? By the time that Jesus came to the Jews, and that whatever system was there was psychotic. It did not reflect what it was supposed to reflect. It had nothing to do with what God intended it to be. It had nothing to do with anything. Had completely misunderstood everything, right? And you get this, so this lack of self-efficacy, you get these people, most Christianity I see today, right? So of late, I've been invited to a whole bunch of Seventh-day Adventist groups. The vast majority of stuff that I've seen on there is either narcissistic or psychotic. The vast majority of stuff. When you go one of these religious websites and you see God will bless you, God will pray this prayer, and God will bless you, and God will this, and God will that. Nowhere is it talking about your responsibility to do things. Where are you in all this? Right? It's like it's God and you. You need to have faith, and God will supply His grace. You need to do your good works. You need to repent. You need to do your things, and God will supply His forgiveness. And there's the proper object relations. There's me, and there's God, and there is a relationship, and there is a backwards and forwards thing going on. But you see, even in religion, you see that complete lack of self-efficacy and self-trust and stuff. That's a pathological religion. It's a path, because the Bible says, yes, you are a sinner, but it also says, yes, God has given you gifts. He's given you talents. Yeah? The Bible is balanced. And then you see people with distorted views of God. One side says, oh, God is a monster. God is a tyrant. He's judgmental, and he's fire and brimstone. And then on the other side, oh, God is basically a hippie. Peace and free love to everyone. God is going to save everyone. Don't worry. Jesus loves everyone. there's no responsibility, there's no requirement of you, there's no expectations of you, none whatsoever. They're both completely and utterly pathological. Neither of them is true. When God needs to judge and punish, he judges and punishes. When God needs to be merciful and forgive, he's merciful and he forgives. When God needs to obliterate something, he obliterates it. When God needs to heal something, he heals it. There's a balance. There's a balance. And we're not balanced. The reason why human beings, we gravitate to these two false, one-dimensional ideas of God is because we ourselves are false and one-dimensional. And we gravitate to whatever resonates with us. Because we do not have true love. We do not love ourselves. And how are we going to love God? If we're so one-dimensional, we're going to love the part of God that agrees with us. But all the other stuff that God actually is as well, we're going to reject, which means, well, guess what? If you don't accept God in his totality, merciful and loving and just, right? Healing as well as punishing, angry as well as loving, wrathful as well as merciful, all right? All of him, all of him. It's either all or nothing. And that's why I did that video where the person who's narcissistic, they portray God only the parts that resonates with themselves, where they actually make themselves God without realizing it. That's the narcissistic way of doing it. And that's what most people, that is the kind of love that most people have today, is a narcissistic form of self-love. Most of it today. That's what you're being taught. So there you have it. There you have it. And know that if you begin to love yourself properly, people are not going to like you for it. Which is why the Bible promises it, right? The Bible promises it. It says, yeah, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Right? You're going to be persecuted, man, because let me tell you something. People don't really like people that love themselves. People don't like people that love themselves, right? Because the entire world is obsessed with turning everyone in the world into an image of themselves. This is narcissism. This is narcissism, right? This conditional love means if you don't behave in a certain way, I'm not going to love you. I'm not going to treat you well. I'm not going to whatever, unless you make yourself into a carbon copy of me. That's what most of the world is like. That's what feminism is trying to do. That's all the feminist activists are trying to do. That's what all the Black Lives Matter activists are trying to do. The LGBT activists are trying to do. The Republicans are trying to do. The white supremacists are trying to do. They only want to see themselves in the world. That's all they want. And if you become an individual, you will make it. If you love yourself properly, and you become your own person, you will become an enemy to the world. Realize this, right? This is why what a lot of people don't realize is not loving yourself. When people reject themselves, in a way, because it's difficult. It's adaptive. The reason why people deny themselves and do the merger and fusion, where they will subdue themselves and go and meld seamlessly into the group, is because it's less threatening. Oh, people are going to like me if I do that, right? So if I cease to exist, people will like me. If I do what they tell me, then they will like me. Then I'll have peace, then I'll have safety. But it's a false peace, it's a false safety. That's why people also do that, right? They compromise themselves. If you compromise yourself, you are not loving yourself, right? You're not loving yourself. And if you shove yourself in the face of other people, you are still also not loving, because this is the dialectic that people do, right? They either compromise themselves or they shove themselves in other people's face. Both of them are wrong. Just be your own person. Whoever wants to come or go, they can come or go. Right? You don't interfere with people. Right? You there, you talk, you give your advice, you get along with people, you say whatever words you need to say, you speak the truth, and you carry on. You carry on and be your own person. And people are not going to like you for that. I guarantee you. Contrary to the popular belief, people like those who love themselves and who love them properly a lot less than they claim to. The whole world is going around preaching, you must be more loving, you must be more loving. But if you are actually loving in the correct, psychologically sound and biblically sound way, people will hate you for it. Right? Because if part of loving means to regard yourself in terms of how you actually are, and regard other people according to what they actually are, the truth, good or bad, they will hate you for it. Because people do not want what people call love is not love. What people are saying, you know what, there's all these mirrors in the world that reflect me, who I truly am, back to myself. I want to smash all the windows. That's what the world believes love is. That love is to smash these windows. They want to see them, their false self. They either want the mirror smashed, or they want the mirror distorted. It's like, if it's not a true reflection, it's not love. It's not love at all, whether good or bad, right? A mirror that gives a true reflection will show you everything, right? It's why women also, I mean, a lot of women, they can't seem to and men especially, they can't. Why do women bother like suffering for the sake of fashion? Why are women wearing things that are impractical, that are uncomfortable? Why do they waste all this time doing their hair, doing their whatever the case might be, right? Men don't want women to do that. But women will judge each other. Women will abuse each other if they don't do that. But because it causes dissonance for women to admit that they're doing that to themselves, they have to blame men for it. Oh, it's the man's fault that I'm wearing high heels. Never mind that no man ever asked a woman to do stuff like that, right? Ask most men, what is your fantasy? What is your fantasy to see a woman? Most men, it's like, you know what, wear a t-shirt, nothing but a t-shirt and your underwear, and I'm happy. Or dress like Princess Leia. If women actually wanted to dress, if the way women dressed actually had anything to do with men, they would all be in cosplay. They would either be in their underwear or they would be in cosplay. They wouldn't dress the way they do. Women dress for each other. It's the same thing with men. Right? Same thing with men. Right? I want to get this big thing, and because they're showing off to each other. Right? Another example, if you think about pickup artists, men who are pickup artists, where they go, this is how you define pick up the art of picking up women, is to search for the woman the prettiest woman who loves herself the least. That's literally what pickup artists are doing. Look for the woman who loves herself the least. Look for the prettiest woman who loves herself the least. And you can do whatever you want with her. Because because the core, she is not there. She doesn't exist. And so you can do whatever you want to her. And in this desperation for love and affection and whatever the case, and vice versa, it's the same. Men do, it's the same thing. Women that really gorgeous women that are that are narcissistic and that prey on men, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, right? You want to avoid that sort of thing? Love yourself. Love yourself. Do not believe a woman that says that she sleeps around because she enjoys it. Don't believe her. Or a man. Don't believe it. People that cannot commit. Like that friend of mine who decided she was going to have a child out of wedlock on purpose because she wants a child. All of her reasons for doing that were narcissistic. Because what a lot of people don't understand in Christianity is marriage marriage to someone who is nothing like you, which is why we also reject homosexuality, right? Because if I marry a man, I'm basically marrying a mirror image of myself, right? It's easy to love another man. He's like me, right? There's no effort. But for a man to love a woman and a woman to love a man, now that takes effort. That takes genuine love. That takes real love, man, right? That is the proof, because the child is nothing like you, right? So this is essentially what this girl did. She was so arrogant to believe that even though she was incapable of establishing a healthy relationship with a man, that somehow she was going to manage to do it with a child. No. The fact that you are unable to establish a healthy relationship with an adult version, with an adult specimen of the opposite sex, is proof positive that you are not ready to have a child. Because the child, if the opposite sex is nothing like you, and the child is nothing like you, and if you cannot do the one, even less you're going to be able to do it with the child, because the child is even less like you than the adult is. And we see the effects of this in the world. All these failed marriages and stuff like that. So lack of self-love in every single case. Pride is lack of self-love. Narcissism, psychopathy, borderline, forcing other people to be what I want and do what I want and this and that and that. We end up tyrannizing each other, because the woman who attaches herself and requires that the man be everything for her is tyrannizing him in just as much as the man who forces the woman to be everything that who imposes himself on the woman. It's two different forms of tyranny. Because then the guy who has the woman that subsumes, he can't do anything without her having an absolute meltdown sort of thing. She doesn't know how to be an independent individual. So he's enslaved by this sort of thing. And then the woman who has a man who's a narcissistic and she's enslaved by his pathology. And this is all we're doing in the world. This is why every society tends towards tyranny, because that's what we do at an individual level. In the home, we start by tyrannizing each other in the home, not loving each other, not loving ourselves. We started in the home, it then expands to the extended family, it expands to the community, it expands to the civil, federal level, and then the government's like, okay, you want us to tyrannize? Well, we'll tyrannize. We're going to force everyone to do everything for everyone else, and eventually it comes to the point where it gets so absurd that it's like, because you can't serve everyone. Because everyone becomes like a god. You can't serve. You can't do it. It falls, because then the interests of this one conflict with the interests of that one, conflict with the interests of the other one and the other one. And then at the end of the day, what do? Everyone is then in court suing each other. And what do you see in the world today? Especially the United States. It's one of the most litigious countries ever. People, it's suing each other left and right and all the time, right? A person who sues McDonald's because McDonald's made him fat. That's an external locus of control. Right? The company writing, I couldn't believe it. Those hair straighteners that women use. On the packaging there, it says, do not insert into vagina. Why is that there? It's external locus of control. Because some woman was either stupid enough to do it, or who realized, there's an opportunity, right? It's external locus. Someone else has to constantly tell me everything, has to treat me like I am a child that cannot do anything for myself. And this is why you get a welfare. This is why the government becomes tyrannical, because the people get to the point where they're telling the government over and over again, we cannot do things for ourselves. Right? We cannot do things for ourselves. Therefore, we give control over everything over to you. That's why the world goes that way. Every single time ends up in tyranny. And people just die left, right, and center, get killed. So where are we going again? Anyway, I've talked enough. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. I hope this helps. God bless. Goodbye.